We are back with our trusty image, and in this video I don't want to show you the actual technique or method for dodging and burning involving the soft light blend mode and the brush tool. Before we begin, I just want to point out that this is the image that I already used a couple of times, and I'm using it again here because I thought, well, in a way we are comparing different methods for dodging and burning, so using the same image is kind of fair, right? And also, in the last video I explained exactly how soft light mode works within the dodge and burn context. And that's why I'm not going to spend too much time on it here. I'm just going to work on an image and let you watch the previous video if you're really interested in how exactly does it work, what are the mechanics behind the soft light blend mode. Before we begin, we need to set up shop. Unlike with the use of the dodge and burn tools, we could in a way just paint on the image, but that's not what we're gonna do. Instead, we're gonna create the new layer and we're gonna fill it with 50% gray or neutral color. And if I just click on this layer, on this icon for new layer, it just creates a new blank layer, and I'm gonna have to fill it with color if I want it to work the way I want to work. Plus, I'm gonna have to rename it here. The better way to do it is to just hold down your Alt key or Option key and click on the little icon, and that will prompt you with a dialog box for the new layer. It allows you several options to choose from. For instance, we can name our layer. We can call it, for instance, dodge and burn. Dodge and burn. Maybe we can call it 50% gray layer, and maybe we can make caps on our letters. Okay, so use previous layer to create clipping mask. That will essentially clip the newly created layer to the background. We do not need that, and I will explain how this works maybe in some of the other videos. Color, that won't affect the layer in any way, except it will be colored with one of those colors when in the layers palette. This is basically something you can use if you want to stay more organized, I guess. Now the mode, that's something we really want to do. We want to change it from normal to soft light. As soon as we do, look what happened. This little option turned on and allowed us to now fill that layer with soft light neutral color, which is 50% gray. Now what's something else? If I roll open this menu for choosing different blend modes, I can see that they're divided into groups, and this whole group here, that's the kind of blend modes that will allow us this option. So if I, let's say, click on the overlay and now go cycle through the different blend modes, I can see that option is still on until I hit the hard mix. Now hard mix is the one that's still in this group, but it's the only one that doesn't allow us this option. And that's because it basically posterizes your image. Just some kind of a side note, so it's not really relevant for what we're doing. What we are going to be doing is switching to soft light. Once we switch to soft light, this option becomes available, and we definitely want to check that on. Opacity, this is definitely something that we can affect later, and it's not necessary at the moment. So we renamed our layer, we set it to soft light, which allows us to click on this option, fill with soft light neutral color, 50% gray. And I click OK, it will in fact create the new layer. It's filled with 50% gray, set to soft light, and it's renamed just the way I named it. Now the next step for this is to choose our brush. Once we have our brush selected, we have our standard options at the top, and this will vary based on your own personal preference. Now, since I am using my pressure sensitive tablet, I realized that for my own personal settings, flow, I always set it to about 3% to about 5%, and airbrush mode is something I always turn on, as well as if I go under my brush panel on the transfer or other dynamics as it used to be called, I have set my opacity and flow to pen pressure. Now these are my settings. If you're using your mouse, they may differ. If you're using a pressure sensitive tablet with different level of pressure sensitivity, you might change those settings. And in one of the other videos I'll explain even more what can we do about all of these settings so that they suit your personal workflow and the way you want to work. So we created our layer, we switched to our tool, which now acts as dodge and burn based on the foreground and background colors. Typically you want to paint with black to burn an area and with white to dodge an area. So let's see how that works. But before I do, I want to activate my help layer so I can see exactly how much work I need, right? Remember that? If I go under my adjustments panel, here I can choose the black and white adjustment, and I can lower my red slider, maybe increase the yellow slider just a bit, and now we have a situation where we need to dodge and burn certain areas, and we can exactly see what needs to be dodged and burned. Now remember, in one of the videos, actually in the two previous videos when I worked on this image, I worked on this cheek area. So in this case I decided to maybe make it less boring, so in this case I'm going to work on this cheek. Let me zoom that even further so you can see. I can collapse this palette actually because I don't need it at the moment. I'm just going to switch to my own dodge and burn gray layer, switch to my brush tool, and now with the settings for my brush I am ready to paint. I am now switching from mouse to my pressure sensitive and trusty tablet, and I can definitely see those darker patches now quite clearly. And I'm going to use my X key, which is used to exchange the swatches, to switch to my dodge tool. In this case it will be just white foreground with the brush, and I'm going to lower my brush just a bit and I'll start painting. Now this is very subtle because of all my settings and pressure sensitivity, which allows me to be really subtle when working on an image. And since I'm using this method for dodging and burning with soft light as my primary method, I'm quite used to working with it as well, so probably it will give me slightly better results. I mean, just my own personal preference and the way I used to work. I'm used to working. Also, I wanted to point out that since I'm using the flow option, I am building up color based on movement, remember? So what is happening here is that every time I go over the same area, I'm starting with 3%, but I'm quickly adding 3%, and I'm quickly adding as much as I need on that area. That's why I love the flow option, and especially if you have your pressure sensitive tablet with you, you can really take advantage of this. And also I wanted to point out some other options that I used, and that is I'm using my foreground color as white. I could have switched to another color. It doesn't have to be white, it could be color of the skin. And in the previous video, if you remember, I showed you what will that do to an image. Now in this case I am using white because it produces at this subtle level, it really produces the kind of effect that I want. But when we get to certain areas that do experience color shifts, instead of working on them later, I could have worked with another color. And I'll show you how that works in just a minute. But right now I just want to go over this area just enough to show you before and after. And of course, anytime you're dodging and burning, you shouldn't spend too much time on one area. The reason for that is that, first of all, it's getting boring, and second of all, you get more objectivity if you switch to another area then come back. Zooming back and forth, another good idea. I'm also switching with my X key between dodge and burn tools on the fly, so everything is kind of happening really quickly. I'm dodging this area, and also I wanted to show you, I think this is going to be a good time to show it to you. Once I'm done with this area, I'll show you how on a more global level I can apply this technique to reshape the cheek whatever the case might be that I'm working on. Okay, I think I'm getting pretty close to this. Maybe just lower my brush, switch to my black as foreground color so I can burn this area, and I'm gonna just lower my brush some more to dodge some of these smaller patches of skin. And then I'm probably going to make some mistakes along the way, but that's easy because I can always fix it. Now let's see the before and after. Before I do, now that I zoomed out, I can see some areas that, whoops, definitely needs fixing. Now I'm sure what I did here is that I made this area too harsh. And I'll show you in a minute just how you can fix that. So let's see before and after. I evened out this area pretty good, so I'll deactivate my help layer. Yeah. What I did here, I lost some of the color and I made this area quite harsh. So what I'll do, I'll switch to my burn tool and I'm going to increase my brush size here a bit and just to add some of that dimension. And maybe darken it just a bit. And I think this is a bit too harsh for me, transition, so I'm gonna fix that as well. And also, this is a good place to show you what I wanted to. First, I'm using my white color here, but if I wanted to work on this area now more, with white, I would just introduce some more white to it. Instead, I'm going to use my Alt or Option key to sample some of this color. And now, actually, I'm going to click on the swatch to open up the color picker. I'm going to make it even lighter, which will act as a dodge tool, but it will also introduce some color to it. And in the previous video, I showed you how that works, which won't discolorize the image as much, but it will allow me to dodge that area quite effectively. Now let's see how that works. I'm changing some of this composition here. Now, a couple of things I want to talk about. First of all, let's see how this looks, the area that I just worked on. If I hold down my Alt or Option key and I click on this eyeball, it will hide temporarily all the other layers except the one that I just clicked on. And this will allow me to see the areas that I worked on. Now, since I'm using tablet, this looks pretty soft, but if you're using your mouse, those transitions would be, I guess, more visible. This is just me applying smaller amounts of pressure, so as a whole it looks like a big mess. In fact, it's quite precise because it's so subtle. And if I Alt or Option click again on the eyeball, it will again show me, just as it did before, all the other layers that were visible at the time that I clicked the first time. So you can see now this area is getting pretty fixed up. May just fix this area for a minute. And unfortunately I can't see it with this. So I'm just gonna zoom in, switch to my dodge tool, and I'm quickly going to fix some of this area. Like so. Now, in case you're wondering what exactly am I seeing, what exactly am I doing, like I said in some of the other videos, we'll discuss more about when to burn, when to dodge, what, when, who, how, and all that questions that you might have. At this point, all I just want to show you is before and after, and how the technique works, and also the mechanism behind the technique itself. I think I'm spending just way too much time here. I'm kind of got carried away in a sense, but I hope you don't mind. So let's see, when I zoom back out, I did miss some of those areas. And let's take a look. Now here's another thing you can do. Since this is editable, if I alt click again or option click, I can see what's going on. Now this is editable. This is just, you know, color painted on a background that's gray. So I can blur this, I can apply filters to this, I can do a lot of things to this. One of the things that I would like to do is I would like to make sure that these areas here that I did such a good job that have smoother transitions. So I'm going to use my lasso tool, for instance, and I'm going to increase my feather option, and that's going to make transition between the selection and the thing that not selected more soft. So I'm going to select this area that wasn't so good. That will be this cheek area right here, and I'm going to apply Gaussian blur to it. Now let me see. If I deactivate the Gaussian blur, you can watch what happens here. And since also I'm working on the layer itself, you have a pretty cool option to see both the versions of it. You know, because Gaussian blur acts on this layer, but it doesn't honor the soft light blend mode. So it allows you to see it without the blend modes. Plus, here I can see how it affects the actual image. Now, when I increase the radius, I'm just affecting that area. And also this selection is kind of making me nervous here. It doesn't allow me to see exactly what I'm doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the Control H or Command H. That's going to hide the selection. It's still active, it's still there, but it's hidden. And now I'm going to increase my, oops, I went too far. To something like 7 pixels for this. Now let's see what happens if I check off the preview option. Not much here. Okay, this is much better. Okay, now watch this area. Before and after. Kind of smoothed it out quite nicely. And this is only affecting these small portions of it. I'm going to press Ctrl or Command H again. It's going to show my selection that was active the whole time. And I'm going to press OK. Oops, it says invalid number entered. The number between 01 and 250 is required. Previous value inserted. Okay. That I guess happened because this in fact is not harsh selection. If I switch to my quick selection, I can see that it's actually quite soft on the edges. And the reason why I'm seeing this blue is because my color for quick mask was set to blue. If I click OK again and click on it, now I can see it better. So this was by the way, if you double click on this icon for quick mask, it will allow you to change the overlay preview color. And let's see how that looks. So you see this was quite soft in transition. So when I applied too much of that Gaussian blur, it ended up being outside this area. So that's why give me that warning message. Alright, I'm going to press Ctrl or Command D to deselect. Now let's take a look, real quick look how this looks. It's getting better. I could still see some areas that needs fixing, but you can see with relatively little work, I mean, you can imagine it without me explaining it to you. Just what difference did that make? Now, of course, you can do this with the other methods for dodging and burning. I'm just using this as an example. This is not unique to this particular method, but since I was using it, I wanted to show you the before and after anyway. Alright, so now that you have kind of an understanding what it works and how it works, let's take a closer look. I have pre-recorded what happened when I click here and then set my soft light and all that stuff. I have this recorded as an action, and in one of the videos we're going to talk about actions and how we can just record all of this. And you can remember at the first video I played that action, so I'm going to play it again here because I just want to demonstrate how this works. And as you can see, that creates another 50% gray layer, and this time it has an empty layer mask attached to it. This is just for me to give you an illustration of how this works. And let me show you. This time I'm going to increase my flow to about 100%. And I'm going to paint on an area like so. So you can definitely see the actual result of what I did, and it's quite obvious. Now what I wanted to show you is that watch what happens if I click to overlay. It kind of really destroys, especially this part of the image where I still have some skin and parts of the actual portrait, I mean the model, and the background is now completely dark. So if somebody asks you, why aren't you using the overlay mode? Well, overlay mode is quite harsh on the image. It tends to make image lighter or darker, and it also tends to make the color shifts quite obvious. So that's why when I switch to soft light, yeah, I'm making changes, but they're not as obvious. That's the difference between soft light and overlay. And I can do the same thing actually on the area that I just painted on. If I switch this to overlay, you can see now, yeah, you can see the exact areas where I painted on. You can kind of see the color shifts and everything. This might have not happened if I originally worked on an overlay mode to see exactly what's going on, but I just wanted to demonstrate the difference. Alright, here's another, I would say, myth in some circles, and that is that 50% gray color that's filled the layer is actually necessary for this to work, and it's not. To show you that it's not, I can deactivate this. Actually, let's leave it on. This is a nicely fixed area. I don't want to turn that off. So instead we're going to work on, how about we work on the cheek that we used to be working on? Or better yet, let's work on this area. And just as I did before, I'm going to copy this name just so I have it in my clipboard. And I'm going to click on the new layer again. I'm going to paste what I just copied, and instead of saying it, I don't even know what I did that anyway. I could have just called it soft light layer, because we're not using the 50% fill now. We don't need to, except switching to soft light, we don't need to fill it with any color. It can be just blank layer set to soft light. That's about it. And if I click now, it's just a blank layer. If I alt click or option click on the icon, I can see it's just a checkerboard. There's nothing on it. It's transparent. And because it's set to soft light, anytime I use my brush tool to do the same thing I did on this layer, this time it won't affect, the soft light which was hidden. In this case, now it's going to apply soft light blend mode to the brush strokes. And that's going to act just the same as it did here. Let me show you. I'll zoom back to her chin area, and I will include my reminder, and I will do the same thing as I did before. My settings for this were 3%. I'm using my pen tool again, and I'm using my white color, and I'm going to gently go over these areas that I definitely see need some evening out. And I'm going to lower my brush size because this is an area that requires a smaller brush. Same as this area here. Again, dodge and burn technique does take time, but really it's hard to beat it because it leaves all the textures, original texture pattern and everything intact. This is an area that's kind of suspicious, because if I were to deactivate my help layer, I wouldn't be sure. This is just part of the mouth, maybe her smile or something, or is this really a patch of dark, blotchy skin that needs fixing? I couldn't tell that, so I would have to go back and forth, before and after, to see exactly what it is that I did, and that's something I encourage you to do occasionally, to switch between normal view and the black and white helping hand view. Okay, this is an area that actually requires some more attention. So I'm gonna quickly fix these areas quite nicely, just using the dodge tool. Need be, I'll use the burn tool to darken an area, but for the most part this is just evening out the darker patches to the surrounding lighter skin. And the more time you spend on a certain areas, the more accurate result you will get. And in this case, this is just for demonstration purposes, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on an area. And this is also an opportunity for you to see me in real time working on an area. A bit loosely, yeah, but I'm still working on it, so the more you watch, the more you'll be able to pick up some of the strokes that I make. And combine that with some of my explanations later on with your own practice, you should be better than I am in no time. Especially if you're using a tablet and you have all that advantages for pressure sensitivity and all that cool stuff. Alright, let's see how this is progressing. Just some areas that here needs to be fixed. Maybe this area here. Definitely I'm now seeing, that's what I mentioned, always zoom back and forth, move between areas. That's definitely going to help your eyes become better at detecting the problematic areas and how to fix them, and actually what needs to be fixed. And somebody once asked me, and I'm going to go over that in a minute, now what's the zoom level you should be working on? And that's quite subjective, it's quite relative based on a lot of different factors. So in case you're wondering, what's the brush size, what's the brush, what's the zoom ratio, well, like I said, it depends on many factors, and I'll go over them in more details in one of the later videos. But for right now, I just wanted to point out that you don't have to be zoomed in 1000% or far away so that you need binoculars to see what you're doing. It can be at any level that you find comfortable. Alright, maybe I'm just spending way too much time here. This is not what I wanted to do, but I got carried away. Sorry about that. Let's see before and after. Definitely I could reshape some of her jawline here. And let's take a look. You can see now that beyond the problem with the color shift, and we are going to discuss that more in detail on how to fix those problems, but for right now let's just focus on the luminance values. You can see that using the blank layer I'm just as effective as I was here. And if I were to select both of those layers and now use my Alt or Option key to drag them to the new group layer, new group icon, same dialog box appears, right? We can name this dodge and burn and click OK. So we can see the before and after of both of those adjustments. And you can see that this image is actually moving along quite nicely. If I were to work some more time and fix some other problems, oof, this could be a quite nice looking image. So let's zoom back to fit in view and deactivate and see what we did. what I would like to do here maybe is just use my dodge tool once more time just to go over this area, maybe make it like so. There's no too much redness in the shadows. Okay, now that's looking pretty good. So, not too much time, loose painting, 2 different methods, before and after. What do you think? Well, it's starting to look quite nice actually, and if we were to work on this image just with dodge and burn tools and the tools that we're going to use to counteract those 2 problems, such as losing the contrast, the overall contrast, as well as the problem with color shifts. So if we don't count that and we just count the dodge and burn tools, I could use them on this image to fix it almost entirely using just the dodge and burn tools. It will look, the skin and everything will look just perfect. And I mean, there's really not much you can go against dodge and burn tools except 2 things. It does take some time, and it does take some patience, and it does take some getting used to. Alright, now let's see some other stuff that we can do. First of all, I'm gonna switch to my background layer, but because I want to show you something, I'm gonna copy the background layer. I'm gonna Alt or Option key drag it to the new layer icon so I can rename it. And let's call this Test. So just a copy of the background layer. And I'm gonna use my tool and I'm gonna switch here to soft light, same as before, right? The same settings. And let's see how that works. As you can see, it actually works just like it did with the blank layer and with this 50% soft light layer, right? Same principle. This time I didn't use any layers. I could have worked on the background layer. I just switched it here. It's the same soft light blend mode as we would get here. This is just a side note. I would typically recommend that you work either on the blank layer or on the 50% gray layer, but if you happen to be wondering, can you do it with just the brush tool? Yeah, you can actually replace the dodge and burn tools just with your brush tool. Isn't that amazing? I guess they didn't thought of that when they created the tools. So let's take a look at something else. Why would somebody use the gray layer? We just saw that the effect of dodging and burning is pretty much the same, even without the layers, right? So it's definitely not because of the brush effect. So why would people even want to use the gray layer? Well, let's take a look. As you can remember, when I first showed you the area that I just worked on, and let me zoom in so you can better see, maybe to 25%. When I burn and dodge this area, and I alt click on this little eyeball icon, it will hide all the rest of the layers and it will just show me this one. So when I do that, I can now not only see the areas that I burned, but because the whole area is gray, it's much easier to spot the areas that I worked on. Now let's compare that with the same Option and Alt key if I click on the soft light layer which was blank. I did work on an area, but now it's getting a bit more difficult to see exactly what happened, right? Now I could have created a soft light layer underneath the layer which was blank, and that will in fact allow me to see what did I do. And temporarily, of course, but that's one of the reasons, you know, when working on a gray layer you actually see the areas where you worked on, but here you don't. Second thing, believe it or not, the dodge and burn tools, the actual dodge and burn tools, work on the gray layer. They don't work on the blank layer, and let me show you. If I create a blank layer, and if I now switch to my tool for dodging, I paint, nothing happens, because there's nothing to paint on. But if I were to create another gray layer, and if I paint now, you can see the effect. Actually, that was with that was with my brush tool. When I click the action, it automatically switched to my brush tool. Instead, I'll switch to my dodge tool, and let me show you. So it does work on a gray layer. Now, if you can remember when I showed you in one of the videos how dodge and burn tools work, I did paint at the beginning on a gray background, and I show you that there is quite some difference between these settings. And the only problem is that they're just, I guess, if you paint on a homogeneous gray background, area, they don't work with the image underneath. They just work on that gray area. So let me get back to just the empty gray layer, and I'll paint with my shadows, and I'll paint over the shadows. Actually, as you can see, I'm just having very subtle effect. If I try to paint with my midtones, I'm having some more luck applying more of the effect. If I switch to my highlights, I'm now applying more of the effect. But when working on this gray background, gray layer, we're really not using this to affect the image. This is almost like if you were to use, different exposure settings here. In order to really get the benefit of this, you have to work on an image, the actual image, where it can detect the actual shadows, highlights, and midtones. When you're working on a layer like this, it's not detecting those, and it can kind of detect all the way down to the image itself. It just works on that layer. So if you're wondering why gray layer, well, that's another reason. Also, you can apply different filters on your dodging and burning area. So if I to Alt or Option click again just to see this gray layer with the area that I painted on, I can now apply different filters. Virtually every filter will work, because this is just, like I created the new background and painted some color on it, so it's nothing different. I can add noise, I can Gaussian, blur, whatever blur I want on this area. Well, sometimes you want to blur this area and you want to see how the effect looks, just as you did when you wanted to see where I painted on, right? So for instance, if I wanted to blur this, I could use my Gaussian blur, and now I can actually see how much of the blur effect, how much the blur effect has effect on the actual place where I worked on. And instead, if I wanted to work on this area, and if I wanted to apply now the blur tool, I am still applying it, but it's much harder to see exactly what's going on. So that's one of the other reasons why when you apply your dodging and burning on a layer that's filled with 50% gray, you have easier time to see not only the effect where you dodge and burn, but also when you apply certain filters, where exactly, how much effect do they have on that dodge and burn strokes. And let me see if I have something else to add about those. Oh yeah, this is something really cool. When you're working on a completely blank layer and you're dodging and burning, you also have now an interesting ability to reselect the areas that you just worked on. So if I Control or Alt click, it will select exactly the areas that I worked on. It doesn't look like that because this is just a preview of the selection, but if I use this selection now to create maybe a curves layer, and I increase how light this area is, I can actually see that how accurate that mask is. I can see all the brush strokes that I made. So there is one method that we can benefit, that can benefit us when using this. If we wanted to now reapply a certain adjustment or a filter just on an area that we just dodge and burn, then working on a blank layer provides us with the benefit of reselecting that area and just applying a filter, adjustment, whatever the case might be, just on that area. Also, actually, maybe I should leave those other methods of fixing the color problems for a video just on that. So in this case, just wanted to point out that there are a couple of more benefits you can use with this ability to select the area where you just painted on, but I'm going to leave that for the next video, actually for the couple of videos down the road. Now, another thing you might worth noting is, and for this I'm going to create duplicate of this image, and I'm going to, when I create duplicate, it allows me to name it. Maybe we can call this just a temporary test, and I'm gonna duplicate merge layers only, which means that anything that's visible will be merged and flattened when it's created the duplicate image, like so. Let me show you something. Here I can see just how big my document is. I don't think this is the most accurate preview of the size of the document, but it's close enough. If you click on this little arrow here, I'm not sure if you can see this, it's beyond the recording area, but if you click on this, and you can do this on your own, you will see a bunch of options, including the document size. If you click on that, it will show you how big your document is. Now let me show you something. It's now 54.7 megabytes. If I were to copy the background layer, you can see what happened. It immediately doubled the size of my document. Let me delete the copy, and you can see it goes back to the original. Well, when you're creating a new layer, which is 50% gray, the size of your document doesn't go up. And I think it goes slightly, but not all the way. And now I'm going to just paint, and I'm going to make some really big strokes here. And you can see now immediately the size of your document jumped. Why is that? Well, I think, this is my theory, I'm not sure if this is correct, but I think that when you're using your blank layer, and the same thing would happen if I use my blank layer, or when I use my 50% gray layer, it doesn't calculate that in the document size. But when I'm painting something, it adds just those paint strokes as some new information. So it was pretty much the same as if I copied parts of an image. And this was what, almost 100 megabytes. Now let's try to use the same method when using the blank layer. I did pretty much similar stuff. Maybe a couple of more strokes and it will be 100 megabytes, but for right now it's almost like that. But watch, so it's like 84.2 megabytes, right? So if I control click to reselect what I just painted, and I delete this layer which I don't need anymore, and now I'm gonna just copy the selection from the background to its own layer by pressing the controller command J. So what it did, it copied just the stroke line. And you can see now that the size of my document went up, but it went over that 84 megabytes. So why is that? Well, when you make your strokes, you don't have as much information. You don't have all these colors. You don't have all these pixels and variations in the skin. This is just extra information. When you just move your brush, you're just adding some information, but not as much. So you can imagine if you have a really big file, and instead you're using just soft light and blank layers, or better yet blank layers, and you're painting on it, it will just calculate parts of the area where you painted, and it won't add up as many megabytes in the long run. So if you're working on a really huge file and you have a ton of layers, this might save you a couple of 100 megabytes, maybe per file, per image. Something worth noting. Let me delete that recreated duplicate file, and let's get back to our original. And let's see if there's something else I wanted to show you based on this soft light. Maybe I can just show you one other thing. It's a tip essentially. And for that, I'm gonna actually duplicate this layer one more time because I forgot to do it the first time. And what it is, well, if I were to now apply, I'm gonna first copy this and I'm gonna apply some noise to this. Filter, noise, add noise. Let's make it uniform, about 50%, and it was uniform. The monochrome option was on, and the reason I want to do this is because I want to demonstrate you something. Now I'm going to deactivate this and I'm going to create my own gray layer, and I'm going to apply the same settings. When I press the Control F or just filter add noise, it will reapply the last setting that I applied to that particular filter. So it's just noise, right? Now let me show you. Well, actually, let me use my layer comps to demonstrate this better. Okay, now I can go back and forth. So this was noise applied on the soft light layer. You can see how much more subtle that effect is, and all that noise is kind of blended in within the image itself. But when I applied it on just the duplicate layer of the background, you can see that it's not as subtle, I would say. It doesn't serve much purpose here. But here, it's a much more subtle effect. And if you want to maybe prevent background from bending and things of that nature, then you also might use the soft light, or actually the gray layer set to soft light. So that's like an additional tip. Let's delete the test duplicate. I hope I haven't forgotten something again. And before I continue, I just wanted to create another 50% gray layer and show you a couple of more stuff. First of all, I used my brush tool to paint with black and white when I first used the first time I showed you how dodge and burn works with the soft light blend mode. But you probably already know by now that you can also use your tool to sample a color from an image and paint with that. So I can now hold my Alt or Option key and paint something, actually sample a color from here, for instance. You can see it sampled. And now I can lower this to maybe 5%. And I can go over areas that, let's say, have more. This is a good example. This area here, I'm not sure if you can see this patch, is quite yellow. More yellow than this area. So if I were to now sample an area from this side and use my brush tool on this area, actually it's too subtle of an effect. I'm going to have to click on this and make it more red. And I did darken it, but it also changed the color. So what if I want to get rid of that yellow color, but I don't want to introduce darkening? Well, I guess I could try to do just as what I showed you in the previous video. The complementary color to warm yellow would be something like black or to blue or cyan. So let me try that. I'll sample this color and I can see just how I'm going to leave these settings on because this shows me just how, I guess, how dark or light the color is, and I'm just going to change hue from this to something that's colder. And let's try to paint now. You can see that not only am I lightening this area, I'm also getting rid of that yellow. This was before and this is after. Before and after. So that's additional benefit you get when painting with your brush over something like this. And let me delete this. Now let me show you what else can I do here. And for this, I'm going to use one of the previous layers, and let me show you what happens. I'm gonna increase my brush size, and I'm gonna increase this to something like 10% to make it a lot more visible. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say I wanted to darken this cheek, and I want to do it in quite loose way. I'm just gonna paint over this area, and I'm doing this very exaggerated way, and I'm doing this mainly to demonstrate the point. So what I did now was I added some darkening to the edges of the image to give it more shape. It's not something I would normally do, I just exaggerate it for you to better see. But of course, when I painted, in order for me to hit this area, I had to paint on the background as well, and you can see the effect being spilled over all the way to the background. Definitely something we don't want, right? So what we can do now is, because we're using the soft light layer and we're not using a mask for this, we can now use additional mask to cover this problem. So to make this really quick example, I'm going to switch to my Magic Wand tool. I'm going to click on the background. Actually, since I didn't have my sample all layers selected, in fact, you can see it now that I clicked on the gray background on that layer, so it selected the gray areas, which we don't want. What we want is just the background. I deactivated it here because I don't want to select that darker patch. So I'm going to activate my sample all layers, and I'm going to select this area. I'm going to go to my refine edge. I think this is quite improved version in CS5, and I think you still have it in CS4, and it's a quite harsh edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make it a bit more smoother here and click OK. And now what I can do is, now I can mask out this area so I'm not affecting the background. Since I have my selection already active on the background, what I can do now is, just with my dodge and burn 50% gray layer selected, I'm going to just Alt or Option click the mask. Because if I were to click now, selected area would be the white on the mask. That will be the visible part, and I want the exact opposite. So instead of me clicking on the mask and then doing the invert Control I as another step, I'm just gonna Alt or Option click on this icon for creating a layer mask, and that's what's going to do. It's going to mask out this area. Now we can see the mask. Because the selection wasn't perfect, I'm getting this black edge, so I guess I could fix that by unlinking the mask and using my arrow keys now to reposition it. And also I can click on it and go to Refine Mask, and here I'm going to switch to Reveal Layer, so on Layer, so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to change some settings. I'm going to increase the contrast. Maybe no, not going to work. Maybe feather. That's much better. And I'm going to move it in one towards the image itself, like so. And I'm going to click OK. So we can see now that I managed to apply this effect of dodging, actually burning, on the cheek and this area without affecting the background. Now when you are using other methods, such as if you're working on the background, then you have to mask the entire background. And if you're working with two curves layers, for instance, the next method we're going to be talking about, then you're already using your mask. So you have to group it or create a new smart object from it to apply another mask, and that's a pain in the neck. This is kind of the benefit, additional benefit that you can achieve. That's pretty much it. Also, if you're painting like this on a layer itself, now what I can do is I can click on an area and I can sample. Actually, not on the mask. I can have to click on my layer. I can sample this 50% gray color, and when I paint, it's pretty much like erasing what I just did. Now let me increase my flow and everything to 100%. That's like using your eraser. It's taking some time to apply the effect. It's a big image, big brush size. So let me see how that worked. You can see now that I have basically restored the effect to its original state. No effect here. So that's how you would work when we're working on the gray layer. You could also, of course, use your eraser tool if you wanted to erase pixels, but you do want to keep the gray thing going. And if you're working on this version of dodging and burning, then you definitely have no problem using your eraser tool. And I don't want to mess up this area that I worked on, so I'm going to use my brush tool on another area like so. So I'm just going to make some effect on this, and I definitely applied 100% white color, so it really made a big difference. And now I can just quickly use my my eraser tool to, with no problem, delete this area if I wanted to. Actually, I think I went a bit too far with this, and if this is too slow for me and I know I want to delete this entire area, I can just select it and click delete. And I think that's pretty much it. I think that covers the use of soft light in dodging and burning process.